So in this tutorial, what we're going to look at is Vanguard, one of the synths that I've put on Logic for you to use. I teach with this mainly because I find it as a very easy synth to get your head around to start with. Some of the other synths that come bundled with Logic are pretty confusing to look at, whereas this is laid out much more sensibly. So all I've got is I've got one version of Vanguard open, and I'm just going to play my keyboard and you can hear it. And also what I've got is I've got an EQ here. I've just loaded up an EQ in the first slot, and I've turned the analyzer on so that we can actually see when I hit C4 here, you can actually see the frequencies involved, so that I can demonstrate filters and stuff like that, so you can get a visual idea as to what's actually happening to the sound. So we're just going to look at the main plate of Vanguard to start with, and how it's set up. You've got this master volume up the top here, which is fairly self-explanatory, hopefully. You've got this MIDI activity, so that when you hit a note you can see that actually you've got some MIDI information coming in from your keyboard to check it's all connected, possibly. You've got this preset setting here. You can either go up and down the presets, or you can actually click in here and you've got a load of presets. That's always a good place to start with any synth, is to just go through the presets and have a listen to them. It's also a good idea to kind of see how they have been created and tweak from there, because if you find a preset that's actually doing what you want 90%, you can just think, well, how do I want to change this, and kind of backwards engineer it to find out how it's been created. So explore those. They've all got prefixes, so LD will stand for lead, BS for bass, ARP for arpeggiated, GAT for gated synths. Syn for synth. 303 is based around the Roland TB303, so they're quite acidy, squelchy kind of sounds. Pads are string pads, and effects, so gunshots, wind noises, all those kind of things would come under effects. What I've actually done is I've saved it so that it defaults to a complete reset. So as soon as you open it up, everything will be reset to its default position. And this is how I was normally approach sound creation, is starting from scratch. Because if you start with a lot of the presets, a lot of them come with the trance gate turned on, and they'll have the delay and the reverb turned on, and actually they'll sound great on their own, but when you actually want to try and integrate that to your piece of music, they won't fit, because the delays and the reverbs will get in the way of everything else in your track. So I often find it's easier to just start from absolutely everything turned off. So over here we've also got just some kind of file systems here. We can load and save presets. So if you found one you really like, you can store it, so you can save it into your Logic folder, take it onto another machine and load it up. If you're just creating a song, they will get stored with Logic anyway, so you don't really need to worry about that too much. You can also store complete banks of presets, so if you're creating a whole series of presets, other than that you can kind of forget about it. You've got an effects master bypass here, so you can bypass all the effects in one go. So for example, if we turn the reverb and the delay on, we can turn them off globally here. The lights won't change colour, but it's just a way of quickly turning everything off. And also you can do the same for the arpeggiator, which is down here. I'll come on to that in a bit. You've also got this setup panel, which will take you to the back panel, as it were. It's kind of modelled on an actual unit. So you've got this kind of fake on-off switch and fake power kettle lead. This is just how the synth kind of functions, so we can pretty much close that and forget about that. I've never needed to change that at all. So onto the synth itself proper. As you can see, you've kind of got this kind of bubbles around different sections of the synth. So we've got this OSC, which stands for oscillator. This is the first major section that we're going to look at. Now this is a 3 oscillator synth. We've got 3 different oscillators, and an oscillator is essentially an oscillating voltage, so voltage that is going positive, back to 0, and then negative, and then back to 0. So we're kind of alternating the different voltage. Now what we hear is, because we hear between anything that happens between 20 times and 20,000 times a second, if that voltage fluctuation is within those boundaries, we will hear it as sound. And different waveforms have different apparent sounds. And what we can do is we can blend and add 3 different oscillators together. in different volumes, which is this next part along here, and different tunings to create different sounds. So you can select the first waveform you would like in this drop down menu. There's a lot to choose from. What I generally start off at is looking at the 3 or 4 main ones that you use a lot of the time. So you've got square wave, sawtooth, sine wave, and you've actually got noise as well. So they're the 4 main ones that you'll find on most synthesizers. All of these other ones are a bit more esoteric, and they just give you different options. There are something like 100 different waveforms you can find on the ES2 synth, which is bundled with Logic. So there's infinite possibilities. You can even use recordings and voice vowel samples as an oscillator. So it's really you're kind of unlimited, really. I'm going to just show you with the 4 main ones how you can create some basic sounds. I'm not going to go into all the other ones. That's for you to experiment with. We could be here all day if I went through each single one here. So to start with the sine wave, so if I just hit a couple of keys, you'll hear what a sine wave sounds like. It's quite soft sounding. Now if you look at the EQ graph over on the right, if I hold down a note, what you'll notice is that you're only hearing one quite narrow band of frequencies, and if I hit the C above that, it's going up to 500, and the one below that's about 250. So you can see that they're multiples. That one will go up to 1 kilohertz. Now also, hopefully what you're noticing is that you're only seeing one peak in the sound. That's because you only get the fundamental frequency, which is the actual frequency of the note you're playing. You don't get any harmonics, so you don't get any multiples of that sound. So they're very basic sounds. So you would use a sine wave to create things like whistle sounds, bird song, bass, that kind of stuff. Very basic kind of sounds. Now if we move up to one of the next most useful waveforms, which is sawtooth. If I now play this, you'll notice that the EQ graph looks very different. Because what's happening is you're getting the fundamental around here, but then you're getting all kinds of multiples of that same waveform as part of the wave. So it has a lot of harmonics within it, so you can create much more complex sounds using more complex waveforms. You'll notice that the square wave has a similar kind of look, but that actually they appear at different multiples. So you can hear that and see, hopefully, that these waveforms are very different. So when you actually add them together and multiply them and filter them all out, you get very different sounds. If I just go back to the sine wave for a minute, I'm just going to show you what some of these other functions do quickly. If I hold down a key, the first controller here for volume is hopefully fairly self-explanatory. That is just so you can change the blend or the different volumes of your 3 different oscillators. So you can have one quite subtle in the background and 2 very loud in the foreground, for example. You can also tune each one by semitones, and if you notice up here, it will actually display what you're doing. So it will go up and down in semitones. So for example, you can have 2 oscillators an octave apart to get a thicker sound. You've then got some controls here which are all about kind of changing the character of the sound, really. You've got this age here which is supposed to mimic older kind of oscillators that would slightly detune. And this one up here, the VCS, that does a similar kind of thing. It will just kind of distress the sound a little bit. And the fat control here will actually is like a chorusing. So what it will do is it will do a stack detune. So it will copy the sound, pitch one slightly sharp, one slightly flat. So you'll get a kind of chorusing, fatter sound. So that's always a good one to play around with. And I can, if I go to the sawtooth here, you'll actually hear that much better. And if I get two waveforms, you should hear even more because it will then detune each one to each other. So you can get some really quite interesting results out of that. I'm just going to turn that off for a minute because I'm just going to go up to this age control here. Let's put another one on so we can actually hear what it's doing. So hopefully you can hear when this is off, it sounds kind of clean and new almost. And as you turn the age control up, it's starting to disintegrate a bit and get a bit buzzier, a bit more distorted. So you can kind of add a bit of kind of analog kind of sound in there as well. This VCS kind of, you see up here it says fat VCS. This will change the kind of character sound of the fat control. They're all kind of linked together. So straight away we've got a massively different sound just by controlling these three knobs here. We've gone from that to that, so you can hear it getting much wider hopefully, and a much kind of fatter sound. So that's your oscillators. That's essentially it for the oscillators. I'll come back to it in a minute when I show you some basic sound creation, how we can use these controls to blend the different oscillators together and get quite a nice rich sound. Going on to the next section, which is kind of the next easiest to understand, is this amp over here. Now all the amp is volume, essentially. So this is the volume of your patch. And then you've got the panning, so we can pan it right and left and in the centre. You've got a stereo spread, so it will make it more mono or more stereo depending on how you control it. You've got velocity tracking, which will actually make the sounds louder as you go up the keyboard. So if we turn this up, the sounds at the top of the keyboard should be louder. And you've got this drive, which is kind of like the drive control on an amplifier, really, on a guitar amp, so you can actually get a more gritty, distorted kind of sound. Again, it's changing the characteristic of the actual waveform. So that's all you need to know about that, really. A lot of these presets can be quite loud. Look at the metering in Logic to see how loud they are and just turn them down. If you want to drive them and get a bit of grungy kind of distortion in there, you can add it there. Going onwards, you've got this filter section. Now what a filter will do is get rid of certain parts of the frequency spectrum, and you've got this cutoff. The cutoff will select the area above or below which the frequencies are affected. So you've got this type here. Now again, all of these ones are more esoteric kind of filters. The top ones are the main ones you'll see on a lot of synthesizers, no matter who makes it. So you've got low pass filters and high pass filters. So I'm just going to look at the low 24 dB and the high 24 dB. The 24 dB, what this means is how steep the slope is. For example, if you look at the low, you've got three different options. So a low 6 dB filter, I can actually show you on this EQ because this has low pass filters as well. So if I just move this filter up, and it's going to filter out these frequencies and leave these frequencies in the sound, in the signal chain. Now at 24 decibels, that governs how steep this cutoff is. So on this EQ, you can go even steeper. You can go up to 48 decibels. So you can be really quite precise as to which frequencies you leave in and which ones you cut out. Whereas if you go down to 6 decibels, it's much more gradual. So you'll still hear some of these frequencies, but they will be quieter than ones up here. So you can see here that we've got options for 6 dB, 12 dB and 24 dB low pass filters. So what that would actually be is, it would be up here. So it would be one of these, and it would be set to either 6, 12 or 24. And it would attenuate all these high frequencies, leaving the low ones to pass. That's why it's called a low pass filter. Alternatively, you've got the high pass filter, which would have been like this one. So we've got a 24-bit high pass filter, so it will get rid of the bass. Okay, so that's what they're doing. So if I go back to my sawtooth and I go to my low pass, what I'll do is I'll move the cutoff down. So at the moment it's all the way up. So what this is going to be doing is essentially when I move this down, it will be doing a similar effect if I drag this all the way down. And I will demonstrate that now. So you can see from the EQ that those frequencies at the top are starting to get attenuated until you're just left with the bass ones, and then it gets to the point where even those are turned down. Now if I was to do that on the graph, you can see that it's exactly the same process. So let me start turning this down. It will sound slightly different just because of how it works in the maths behind it, how they're working. All filters tend to sound slightly different from each other, so this one tends to sound a bit smoother. And this one was stepping as I moved it down, obviously. Now what you've also got here is you've got key tracking again, so the filter can change as you on different parts of the keyboard, so you can get the filter on the higher notes to be brighter than it is on the lower notes. And you've also got velocity tracking, so that it will be brighter or darker depending on how hard you strike the keys. So it's just there to give you a bit more realistic playability of the sounds, because some sounds, like for example if you're trying to create some percussion sounds, if you hit a drum harder, for example, it tends to get brighter. So you can try and emulate all those kind of characteristics of a sound with these kind of things. You've also got this little thing here named Reso, which is stands for resonance. Now what resonance does is it artificially boosts the cutoff area so that you hear it more. So at the moment it's turned off. So what I can do is if I start to filter, if I turn the resonance off, you should see a peak appear here, and as I sweep it you'll see the peak is actually, rather than just a flat line, it will actually be boosted at certain areas. So if I turn this up now, and I now affect the cutoff, you can see that as I move the resonance you can see that area really peaking. I'm not going to boost it too hard because it can actually hurt your ears on some speakers, because the resonant peaks can be quite loud. So I'm just going to sweep this down and you can see what it does. So what we're doing is we're artificially boosting that cutoff frequency just so that we can hear it more, and this can be useful for lots of different effects, just for boosting that area. Now if you listen to that turned right up, sounds much harder than if the resonance is off. The filter gets much smoother. So that's the filter section. Basically, I'm just going to show you quickly the alternative, which would be the high pass. Now, if the high pass is all the way up, you're not going to hear much. In fact, nothing at all until I turn it down. You'll hear that you're just getting the high frequencies. So the cutoff works the other way round, because the cutoff is now set all the way down the bottom. So now it starts to cut out the bass and leave the tops, which is essentially the same as doing this. Okay, and you've got all kinds of ones in between. You've got band pass, which is essentially it lets a narrow band through, so it's a high and low cut, and it will just let the medium frequencies through, or the middle frequencies. And you've got a notch, which is a band reject, so it'll leave the high and the lows and get rid of the middles. So there's lots of different filters here that will do different things. Just play around with them, see what they sound like. There's no real hard and fast rules here as to what you want to get. The next important stage in a synthesizer is the envelope, and we have two. Now what happens is that when you hit a note, we're just hearing that note played, and we have no control over how that sound decays over time, or the volume or the filter over time. We can set the filter, so we can set the volume to be a certain volume, we can set the filter to be a certain level, but what if we want those values to change over time? And that's what an envelope does. So you've got two different envelopes here, and what they stand for is you've got an ADSR, and what that means is attack, decay, sustain and release. And what you find is that the attack time is the time it takes for you to hit the note and for whatever you are affecting with that envelope to get to its full amount. You've then got a sustain level, which is the level that it stays at once the key is pressed and held. The decay time is the time it takes to get between the maximum level governed by the attack phase and the sustain phase, and then when you release the key, you've got the release phase, so how long it takes to die down to nothing again. We'll come back to envelopes because they can be quite a hard subject to get your head around. But essentially you've got two ADSR envelopes, and these can affect up to 4 different variables. Now we've got level, which is essentially your amplifier. PWM stands for pulse width modulation, which is essentially changing the waveform of the square wave. So if a square wave was nice and even, you would see the top half of the square and the bottom half of the square as nice even squares. What you can do is you can change the width of the on and off periods so that the square kind of changes its dimensions a bit and it has a different sound. You've got the cutoff you can change, so you can change the filter, and you can also detune it as well. And envelope 2 allows you to affect the resonance, again the pulse width modulation, the cutoff, and this time the pitch rather than detuning. So the two different envelopes can be used to change different things over time. Now if they're set to their middle value, it won't have any effect. Now what I've done is I've turned this one up on level so that it will positively affect the volume over time, and that's how it defaults. Because most people will play around with this and go, I can't hear anything working because these ones aren't selecting anything. So I've purposely turned this all the way up. If it was turned down, it would negatively apply the volume. So the volume would get quieter over time. We want it to actually come in volume. So at the moment, the attack phase is very quick. It's almost off. So as soon as we hit the note, it's going to be at maximum volume. I'm just going to turn this filter up so we can hear it. And also you can notice that the sustain level is right up. So what's happening is the attack phase is very quick, so as soon as we hit the note it's at full volume. The decay phase is very quick, so it's decaying almost instantaneously to the sustain level, which is at maximum, and the release level is again off, so it's very quick. So as soon as I release the note, the volume disappears, it just completely switches off. So we've got a very quick kind of note. Now what I can do is I can raise the level of the attack. So now what's going to happen is it's going to take much longer time for the sound to get to its maximum level. So if I hold the note now, you can hear it took a lot longer time to get to its maximum level, which was still set by the sustain level. But when I release the note, it went away completely. So what I can do is I can raise the release level, and that will now, when I release the note now, it takes a little while to die away. So straight away we've got a different sound because we can create some kind of string swelling patch. So you've essentially got some sustain and you've taken away the hard edges of the sound. Now what we could also do is have a quick attack and a slow release. So we have something like a sustain pedal. And there's all different kinds of combinations of these that you can use. Now if we use the decay time, if we make a quick decay time, a long decay time, but actually put the sustain level down, what you'll hear is that it will quickly be at maximum volume, but it will slowly go down. So you can hear that the volume kind of dies away. So if I put the sustain level even lower, you can hear what the decay phase is doing. It's getting to its maximum level very quickly, then it's taking time to decay to a quite quiet level. We could then turn the release time up as well to get a totally different timbre as well. Okay, so you can really affect these sounds over time. Now that's the sound of the volume envelope, so we're affecting the volume envelope. Now if I click on this and take this back to 0, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you another major use for this, and that's the cutoff. Now what I want to do is actually I want this cutoff to open over time, so I want the filter to kind of open up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to affect the cutoff to a positive level, so I want the cutoff to open up. So what I'm going to need to do to start with is close the filter, and then what I can do is have it happening over time. So I'm going to move up the attack phase, and you can see from the graph here on the EQ that it's taking time for the filter to open up. So essentially what I'm doing is getting this cutoff to move automatically for me, and I can get it to happen even slower. Now what I can also do is have this affecting the release time, but you're not going to hear the release time unless the note volume is having a high release as well, because I can turn that up now and you'll hear no effect, because the release volume is going off completely. So what I'd really need to do is reset these to the cutoff and actually affect the volume, and then put the cutoff on the second one. So what I'm going to do is, just like before, I'm going to get this to slowly open my cutoff, but this time all I've done is I've changed it over to envelope 2. Now on envelope 1, what I want to do is I want my level affected on the release. So then if I affect the filter as well, we'll actually hear it now, because we're having time for the filter to release, and we're hearing it because the amp is releasing as well. So you can hear the filter starts to come down again when I release it. So there's all kind of things you can do here. We could also affect the pitch. So as we hit the notes over a long period of time, the pitch is going up and it's coming down again. If we didn't want it to come down, all we'd do is turn the release off. It's going straight back to its original pitch. So I'm just going to reset that. I'm holding Command and clicking on these to set them back to their defaults. What we could also do is we could change the resonance and all this kind of stuff. Now, conversely, if we were to go the other way around, I'm just going to show you the same thing with the filter. So here we had the filter opening up over time. Just turn the filter up. If I actually wanted the filter closing, what I'd do is I'd actually say, well, I want it to close by its maximum amount. So I'm going to turn it all the way the other side, but now I'm going to open it. So it's going to start from its open period and it's going to go to its close period. So you can hear and see that the filter is actually closing. So that's the envelope stage, really. It's how you can have a time envelope to change lots of things over a time phase. Now, if you want those changes to happen again and again and again, what you need to use is an LFO, which is a low frequency oscillator. And you have 3 of these. Now, this is an oscillator that you can't hear because it's very low frequency. It's subsonic. But what you can do is you can use it to affect something in the audible spectrum. So you can actually use this to affect something that we can actually hear. So here we've got the choices to alter the tuning, the pulse width modulation and the cutoff filter. And we've got a speed as to how quickly this LFO is triggering, so we can get some interesting sounds. Now what you've got is you've got 3 low frequency oscillators, one tuned to each oscillator, so you can have each one affecting the different oscillators. So for example, if I want my filter opening again and again and again, if I use just an envelope, all it's going to do is open once, and then it's going to close once if I have the release turned up. So if I want it to close and open repeatedly, I would use an LFO. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the LFO to be on my first oscillator. Re-trigger basically will start the LFO from its initial level every time you hit a new key. So if you don't want it to re-trigger, if you hit another key straight afterwards, it will continue on the same part of the waveform wherever it got to. Whereas if you have it on re-trigger, every time you hit a new key, it will start from its top value. I'll play you the difference in a minute. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to positively affect the cutoff, so I'm going to turn it up. And I just need to turn the speed up. So we can hear there that every time I touch it, the filter is opening and closing repeatedly. Now if I hit re-trigger, no matter when I hit the key, it's going to always start from the front. Whereas if I don't have re-trigger on, it's almost as if the oscillator continues in the background, and every time you hit a key, you hear wherever that waveform got to in its oscillation. It's essentially a sine wave, this low frequency oscillator. Some other synths give you options of using square waves, sawtooth, so you can actually get different sounds. This one is a straight up and down sine wave. So what you're doing is you're kind of picking that sine wave up at somewhere along its wavelength, and it's different every time. So that's what the re-trigger button will do. So if I hit a note now, it starts from the beginning every time. If I don't have it, it changes every time. So this is a way that we can have the filter changing. And you can get that kind of dubstep wobble bassline thing by changing the speed. Now what we can also do is we could turn it down and have it actually going the other way. So actually it's closing this time rather than opening. So that's the difference of going left or right of kind of midday on these knobs. Now what you can also do is do the G tuning, so you can get a kind of siren sound. Or you can get it detuning the other way. Let's turn it even more. Okay, so there's lots of fun that can be had with that, and you can have different ones for different oscillators. So you can have 3 going at once. You've got this thing down here called the trance gate, which is rhythmic gating. So if we turn it on, you'll straight away hear the effect. And you've got this pattern in here. If we turn it on stereo, you can do the left and the right pattern totally independent of each other. Basically what's happening is you've got these 16, I think there's 16 different things that you can click on and off, and it will basically play that pattern over and over again. And you've got a speed as to how quick it will play it as well. So if I just hold a couple of notes, you can hear the difference. So you can change the pattern of how it's rhythmically gating there. And also if we turn it onto stereo, what we could do is we could have it ping-ponging between each ear. Which, to be honest, just makes me feel a bit sick. So I usually leave it on the mono version so that you get it happening the same in each ear, because it can make you feel a bit dizzy, I find. You've got the speed, is how quickly it will actually happen. So it's happening 32. So this is similar. You'll see these values everywhere. You'll see them in the quantized values in Logic, beat markers and things like that. So this is the division of a bar basically. So at the moment it's happening every 32 segments in a bar, but we can have it happening slightly slower or even slower or very quick. And you've also got triplet time bass and dotted rhythm time bass, so you can actually do something. So I would essentially say pick one that's fitting whatever music you're doing. Really, there's no right or wrong answer about what you choose to use here. Now the mix will be a mix of the original sound, non-transgated, and the transgate in the background, so you can actually get a blend, so you can actually get the sustained note behind it as well. So at the moment we're hearing 100% going through this transgate. If we turn it all the way off, we're just hearing the sound on its own. So if I blend halfway between the two, you'll hear the sound and the sound with the transgate applied. And anywhere in between. So you can blend the effect in, you can automate all of these parameters in real time as well through Logic, so you can have your intro starting, for example, like this, and then blending in. It can all be automated. Check the automation videos for that. And we've got this contour section. This is how deep the peaks will be, the nulls really. So what this will do is either make it go on and off completely, or kind of on a little bit, off a little bit, if you get what I mean. So set up here, when you go through the black phase it will be on, and the non-phase it will be off. Here it kind of blurs the boundary between what's on and off. So you don't get the volume completely turning on and off. It kind of gets turned down. Whereas here, as you go further and further up here, it will go on and off completely. And then we can just turn that effect off. We've got delay, which we'll need to turn the mix up a bit to hear it properly. And let's turn the feedback up. The feedback is the fact that the output of the delay will go back onto the input. And what will happen is that will mean that you'll get more repeats of the delay. So we can hear that coming in. It's happening quite slowly, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn it up to 4 bass. And you've got different versions at the moment with stereo. We can have it mono. We can have it crossing between ears. And lots of different things like that. So we can turn the mix right up and we can turn the feedback up. The dampening is how bright or dark it will sound. So that's very damp. So what happens is that the first repeats are brighter than the latter repeats. So it kind of gets filtered out almost if we take the dampening down. You notice that each of the repeats is almost as bright as the original sound. And if you only want a couple of repeats, turn the feedback down. If you want lots, turn it right up. And that's just going to carry on going until I turn it down. So I'm just going to turn it off. And you've also got this reverb as well. Pretty horrible metallic one. You can dampen it as well. And you can have lots in the mix. And you can change your room size. So if we make the room size smaller, sounds small. Or we can change the width, so it sounds a bit more centered. Or we can make the room sound really big. And make it all crazy. So you've got some effects there as well. Now what you've also got is you've got pitching. So this is the pitch bend range, which affects how much the pitch bend wheel changes the pitch. So if I hold one note and just move the pitch bend all the way to its maximum, it goes up 2 semitones, and it goes down 2 semitones. If I actually move this up to, say, 12 semitones, an octave, it will now pitch over an octave, so you can change that there. You've also got vibrato, so if I actually hold a note, you actually get some vibrato, so you can get some crazy old synth sounds. It's quite nice in a way if you have it slower. Oh, that sounds a bit horrible actually, so I'll turn the depth down as well. So you get that gentle kind of swaying kind of sound. Can sound quite nice with string pads. I'll show you that in a minute, so I'm just going to turn those off. You've got glide, or what its official title is portamento. This is where the sound can glide between two different notes. So at the moment, if I hit one note and hit another one, you only get the distinct notes. If I turn the glide on and make it slightly slower, what we'll notice is when I hit the next note, it kind of slurs between them, so you can do some bass kind of slides. And we can make it really slow as well, so it happens over a bar. This is what this would be. Okay, so you can get some sliding going on there between the notes. And the last thing here is the arpeggiator. Now what this will do is it will create arpeggios for you. An arpeggio is just essentially a broken chord. So if we play all the notes in all the main notes, the third, the fifth and the octaves in C, we have C, E, G and C. The arpeggio of that is to just hit them in sequence. And that's all an arpeggiator will do for you. So at the moment the mode is up, so it will go upwards through the notes. The speed is how quickly. The gate is how short the notes will be. And the octaves will be how many octaves this works over. So if I turn it on and hold those notes, it's going to play them all through. Now I can slow it down. And at the moment you can hear that they're quite choppy, so I'm going to turn the gate down as well so that they get wider notes, or you can make them really choppy, and we can make it really quick. And we can make it up and down, so we can go down or we can go alternate between up and down. Do this over 2 octaves or up to 4. So you can have all kinds of crazy electro kind of sounds, and you can have random as well. So ordered will be the order in which you actually play the notes as well, so you can do it in a totally different. So there I played the C, then the G, then the E, then the top C. Now these work really well with a delay as well, so if we actually put on a delay of say something like a dotted 8. So you can really start to fill the spectrum up with the sounds. So what I'm going to do now is just show you a couple of methods that I use. I mainly use this. This is a really useful synthesizer to create kind of synth patches and synth pads. They can sound really great. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select 2 sawtooths. I'm going to tune them slightly apart. So what I'm going to do is put one an octave above. Then what I'll do is I'll put one an octave below as well. So I've got a nice thick sound already. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn that top one down and turn the bottom one down as well. So I've just got a bit of bass in there. Now what I'm going to use is use this fat control just to get it sounding really nice and kind of chewy. And I'm going to alter the age a bit as well. What I want is a little bit of vibrato, so I'm just going to turn that in. Just a tiny amount. Now what I'm going to do is, it's quite brash, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a filter to soften it down a bit. So already we're getting there. Now what I'm going to do as well is I'm going to affect the volume. I want the volume to slowly come in and slowly go away. Too slow. I'm just going to speed that up. And what I'd also like is, I'd like the cutoff kind of opening a little bit. So I'm just going to have the cutoff opening a shade and have that happening quite slow as well. A bit too much, so I'm just going to have that turned down just a shade. I think it's a bit too bassy, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get that oscillator right out of the way. I want my release holding on to the sound just a bit more on the amp, so I'm just going to turn that up. What I'm now going to do is I'm just going to turn on the delay just to thicken the sound a bit. And put a big reverb on it as well. It's a bit crazy length, so I'm just going to turn that down now. Turn the room size down a bit, but I'm getting a lovely sound there, just with 3 of the same waveform and just tweaking it a little bit. So what we've really got is 3 waveforms at 3 different octaves, blended them together to get a nice fat chorusing sound. I've filtered out a lot of the high frequencies to make it softer and warmer, and then I've got the amp turning up over time so that I've got a nice smooth intro and outro of my sound. And I've also affecting the cutoff slightly so that the cutoff just opens up a bit as the sound kind of breathes. I've got a bit of pitch vibrato just to give the sound a bit of movement, and a delay to thicken the sound, and the reverb just to top it all off. Very simple way of creating a good sound there, I think. So this would work really well in any genre, really, house music especially, but you've got a really nice bed of pad strings there. Now going back to this default, what we could also do is create some kind of bass sound. So what I'd potentially be doing is going for something much harder edged, so I'll go for a square wave this time. What I might do is add it to a sine wave to give it that real kind of bottom end. You can hear the sine wave gives it that kind of extra octave below. I'm going to experiment with this fat control, see what it sounds like. Not really working for this patch. That works really well for strings, but want this one to kind of sound good on its own. Yeah, kind of like that on its own. I'm going to add some drive to the amp. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to affect, what I want is to just get rid of some of that top buzzy. I just want the bass. I'm going to turn the resonance up as well to get a thinner, reedier kind of sound. I'm actually going to go for a 12 dB, so it's not quite so savage on the high end. So straight away we've got a totally different sound just by using a different couple of oscillators and tuning them apart. That sounds a bit better actually, putting that up the octave. So what I might now do is put another square wave down the octave. Turn it down a bit. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this to... What am I going to get this to do? I'm going to get this to change its amp volume over time as well. So what I want to do is get the release. I don't want the release to kind of tail away too quickly. Somewhere around there. I'm going to turn the sustain down though. Have it really choppy. Now I'm going to counteract that with some volume boost. Now I'm going to put some delay on it, and I'm going to go for, start with something like this. I'm going to go for a dotted delay. I'm going to turn the dampening down so it doesn't get too muddy. Turn the mix down so it's just subliminal in the background really. Turn the feedback a little bit. So I hear the delay repeats, but they're much quieter. So there you go, two vastly different sounds just by tweaking a few little parameters, and once you've got your head around what these parameters actually do, you can start to make informed choices as to how you want to change your patches. So if we, for example, let's go up to one of the presets and I'm just going to find some kind of pad sound, something like the silver strings, and I'm going to listen to it. Now to me that's pretty horrible. It's kind of got this wow kind of wobbly sound. Straight away I know that it's got lots of vibrato, look. So I'm going to turn the vibrato depth right down and the speed right down. And straight away it's got rid of that. Now the delay's making it really choked, so I'm going to turn that off. And also it's very detuned and very chorusy, and I can see that the fat controls turn right up. So I'm going to turn it down. Now also it's kind of doing this kind of wow over time. And if we look here, what's happening is that the cutoff is happening a little bit once you release the keys. So I can get rid of that, and I can also, if I look on here, we've got some detuning going on the LFOs. So the first oscillator is being detuned and the second one's being detuned as well. So I'm going to just put these back to middle. Just tweak till I like the sound a bit better. Now also this digital, if I just listen to these oscillators one by one, that's what's happening. That's what the second oscillator is. I don't really like that at all. So I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm going to listen to the first oscillator. That's not so bad. I'm going to add in the third one. So straight away, to my mind, that's better. What I'll probably do is put a low pass filter on it to smooth it out a bit. So straight away, from a preset, we've got fundamentally nicer sound to my ears, much more useful. And also, if you chuck the trance gate on things like that, they sound great. If we turn the contour down a bit and the mix down a bit, you get a really nice sound. So there you go. A lot of the presets are just to show the synth off. Really, it's very dance based. It's very trancey. So you might find them useful. I tend to find they're all pretty horrible. There was one used to be called Welcome, which was anything but. So hence why I've recreated a new setup so that it starts with just a sine wave. So experiment. Get back to me if there's any problems or there's things you don't understand, but that should be a fairly good introduction to get you going with what is essentially a very, very powerful synthesizer to use. So yeah, get involved and enjoy. See you next time.